I guess the first question I'll ask, and Bill, I'll go to you as a former Senate staffer. You know this well. What's so neat and exciting about reconciliation, and why is it also a problem?
Well, first of all, I think in the history of the Budget Act, which has been about 50 years now, there have been 22 reconciliation bills. And historically, the founders of the Congressional Budget Impoundment and Control Act, when they put this into place, there was we used to have two budget resolutions. We had one in the spring and then one in the fall. And the one in the fall was to reconcile with the instructions that were in place. And we eventually did away with the second, and that's where the word reconciliation comes from. But importantly, why it was important was in those days, the real focus was on deficit reduction, fiscal restraint, fiscal sustainability. And even though we were only talking about deficits of $70 billion back in 1980, we are now, the purpose of the Budget Act in many ways with reconciliation was to focus on making changes in those programs that had direct spending authority, the big ticket items, the 2/3 of the budget, so to speak. That was the strength of this, because they were of the ability to put together a package that would really deal with, under expedited procedures, the fiscal outlook by either increasing revenues or reducing spending. The problem has become that back, and maybe Joe would say I'm partly responsible for this. Back in, we were very successful, overly successful, let's say 1997, under negotiated bipartisan agreements, where we resulted in, and not entirely because of it, but we resulted in a budget agreement that actually the next few years created a surplus. And so when the Bush administration came in 2001, and by the way, that surplus was being projected by both the Congressional Budget Office, the outgoing Clinton administration, the wannabe incoming Gore administration, the Alan Greenspan Federal Reserve, surpluses as far as the eye could see. And so the incoming Bush administration in 2001 said, let's use this process called reconciliation to reduce taxes, not increase taxes, but reduce taxes. And the purpose of that was not to create a deficit, but to bring that surplus, which hard to believe can be as damaging to an economy as can be deficits. And that kind of opened up the floodgates then later on, which said, well, if you can use reconciliation to cut taxes, then certainly you could use reconciliation to increase spending. And I think that's where we went off the rails. And today we're using this for a very partisan approach to various, whether it was the Trump administration in 2017 using reconciliation to cut taxes in the midst of projected deficits, or, and I'm not terribly critical, but I will say, to increase spending under the American Rescue Plan in the Biden administration earlier this year to add $1.8 trillion in spending, which maybe was necessary, but to avoid the having to face a possible 60-vote filibuster in the Senate. So the process has changed dramatically over the 50 years in which it was originally envisioned for what it was designed to do.
Joe, question for you, as someone who's worked in the executive branch. When we use reconciliation, there are obviously some things that you can and cannot do in a reconciliation bill. And because the executive branch is responsible for implementing the laws that Congress passes, do you have any comments or feelings or reactions to using reconciliation to implement major policy changes like the ones that we're contemplating now and the ones that have been contemplated in the past through reconciliation?
I pretty much echo Bill's general sentiment, which is to say that when it comes to spending money, you probably don't need a parliamentary advantage. Certainly not when it comes to cutting taxes. I mean, cutting taxes is a little bit like handing out candy in a schoolyard. You know, it's easy enough to do that without help. So the use of reconciliation to make the budget worse, I think, is troublesome to many folks. Unfortunately, the ability to make something easier to do in our hyperpartisan environment, where allegedly you can say if you're a Senate majority with less than 60 seats, the other side is going to do everything they can to make you fail. So you can't get votes to do even things that are essential for the republic. That's a negative thing. If we look at reconciliation in the spirit in which it was considered, back in the 1970s, I wonder, Bill, I wonder if the 1970 Act was worded the way it was in a presumption that there would always be deficits, and therefore they didn't have to say anything explicit about these. I wasn't there. Well, I was there, but not in the room. I am concerned. Yeah, unfortunately, I was there. I am concerned about going in that direction. On the other hand, if you tell me we're using reconciliation to solve the budget problem, and to do that, we've got to do some complicated things like restructuring our healthcare system. If we've got a good way to do it, and we can manage to make some of those painful choices, including raising taxes, without a supermajority in the Senate, I think that's what it was created for. And really, the only area where I would take issue with Bill is I believe that the 1998 budget was balanced in 1993 with the reconciliation bill that was passed then. But we can use our comparative charts to try to demonstrate who's right on that one.